Hi, welcome to yet another episode of The Leadership Enigma. Listen, you know that we're available on all your major podcast platforms, but all importantly, we're now available on YouTube, which is why all episodes are coming from LaunchPod Studios, and more of our archive footage is being put on YouTube all the time. So please do check it out, subscribe, listen, give us feedback, tell us what we should be doing, who should we be talking to, what are the hot topics of the year. We'd love all of that information and really have a rich conversation with as many of you as possible to drive the direction of the Leadership Enigma for this year and beyond. So this week, what are we talking about? Well, we're really talking about the daily reset. I've got the author of that book, Dr. Steven MacGregor, with me, so come back to me after this break because we're going to talk about that knotty issue of how do you drive personal change, really drive personal change during constant change. So I'll see you in a moment. Hi, I'm Adam Pacifico, and welcome to the Leadership Enigma, a world-ranked, award-winning podcast that's insatiably curious as regards what leaders do, how they do it, and importantly, why. We'll delve into the human doing, but even deeper into the human being and the power of human-centered leadership to drive sustainable change. So whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts and disruptors, as together we will discover that success leaves clues. So it's a warm welcome to Steven MacGregor. Steven, thanks very much for taking the time to come into the Leadership Enigma. How are you?
I'm great, Adam. It's lovely to be here.
It is really quite nice to be in the studio,
yes,
isn't it?
Yes.
I think sometimes I might take it for granted, but you saw it for the first time just almost like 10 or 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, I'm used to doing all these kind of Zoom interviews and even, yesterday, but I'm in town in London for a keynote, and even just being in front of a live audience again is wonderful. And being in a studio like this is fantastic as well.
That human proximity piece, which we'll come on to, certainly. Now, I know you described yourself as a recovering academic, which I love. I'm a recovering lawyer, so we're both recovering from something. But I didn't give you much of an intro, so just help the listeners and the viewers understand a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I'm an engineer.
Right.
And the focus was
a
in
recovering engineer as well.
Yes, there we go. Yeah, and but the focus was in design. So a PhD in design thinking.
Yep.
And for me, design is about understanding basic human needs. And so for me, that got me into this whole field of well-being, because I started to realize that within the world of work, people weren't well, and that was affecting their health, and it was also affecting their performance. So that was the question that really came to me 20 years ago. I was a visiting researcher at Stanford, and my own well-being was optimized at that time.
Yep.
A lot of my colleagues had finished the first degree, and they were in the world of work, and they were pretty miserable. I was a poor student. They were earning money, which was another thing altogether. But I thought, what's a better way of combining kind of optimal human experience and working well at the same time?
That's fascinating, because you don't know this, but we have a link in that I've spent time with the D.school in Stanford.
Great.
And actually been on campus there at Stanford, which is an incredible place.
Yeah.
And I'm always impressed, and wish I could almost pull up some photos now, where, and Justin Farrell, who is at the D.school, has been on this show, but many, many moons ago. So if he's listening, it's probably about time he came back on. And what I was really, really impressed with was the curiosity of design thinking about human behavior, the empathy, humble inquiry, to really, almost from the ethnographer's perspective, put yourself into somebody else's shoes. I'll just share a quick story, and this has always fascinated me. I remember going to the D.school, and there were these little photos. You know those photos you get almost like from a Kodak Instamatic? Yeah. I'm showing my age, aren't I? And as I went in there was a wall of these photos. And there's pictures of different students, and all it's got is their first name, so maybe Adam, and the degree that they're doing, whatever it is that they're studying. So Adam, law, or it might be Steven, engineering. And it's an eclectic mix. It really does look like, in some ways, the United Nations, and they're studying all kinds of weird and wonderful things. And I remember saying to the D.school, I said, "What is that?" And they said, "These are our cohorts, and they are incredibly disparate group of people from all over the world. They're all studying here. They're doing very, very disparate things." And he said, "We call it radical collaboration because we've got incredible diversity of thought, which adds to that heartbeat of design thinking." And that really resonates with me. kind of what was the anchor for you for design thinking? Because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. I think a lot of the basics that I learned in what is design, and you touched on it there, is the power of multidisciplinary teams.
Yes.
And so what we learned through the study of design was that you're bringing together different expertise, but you as a designer are trying to synthesize that into trying to solve wicked problems. That,
I love that phrase.
Design thinking, back in the day when it really, IDEO really mainstreamed a lot of that. It was about how can we solve wicked problems, not just selling more stuff necessarily, but even a lot of human-centered design in developing countries, a lot of environmental issues. And there's a bit of a backlash also in the last couple of years into was it promise unfulfilled and all these different things. But I just think the power of the mix that you touch on, the power of diversity, bringing together different functional expertise, but just bringing together different skill sets and different backgrounds rather than just having kind of group think is immensely powerful. And then for me, extending that into the workplace in terms of pain points. So I think another very valuable term from design thinking in terms of what are the pain points that we have in our own day.
Yes.
Then it's realizing that everyone is unique, right? All of these names
and embracing
on
it.
that wall,
Yeah.
And it's not just about imposing the way that we think we should work as an employer or within a culture within the workplace, but recognizing we all have different needs and there's different ways that we will thrive within the workplace. So I think design really gave me that foundation. It's been very powerful.
And I think we've walked into a really meaty leadership topic already, in that leaders have got to have the courage to embrace the diversity of thought, to battle against the echo chamber. And one of my guests, this was John Amici in one of the first episodes, he said something to me which has always stuck in my mind. He said, one of the biggest challenges is that interpersonal comfort trumps organizational change. And that's not suggesting that a homogenous group of people can't drive change, they can. But for transformational change, if you can really tap into that diversity that you spoke about, that really lights the blue touch paper, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. There's another term that I really love within the world of kind of agile ways of working, which I think there's a really powerful overlap there with design thinking as well. And it's participation over power. And I think a lot of teams, a lot of organizations, they're driven by power. They're driven by that tenure, let's say, right, or the seniority. But I think for any organization to move forward, and as you say, being brave in leadership is for leaders to actually welcome ideas, dissent even from different factions.
Perish the thought. But, you're right, dissent.
And even, when I talk to leaders and I say, look, and they nod their heads when they're saying, you get psychological safety in the team, do you think that you're very welcoming and different perspectives? And everyone's, yeah, of course. Then I just ask this simple question, how do you react if someone disagrees with you? And especially if that someone is very junior, right?
Yeah.
And in many ways, our ego gets bruised quite easily, right? Especially for a leader. So if someone disagrees with you, then, how do you react? And I think that's an interesting question for many leaders.
Do you know what? As we're talking, I actually think that my experience of design thinking and that time at Stanford has had an impact on me. We had a session only last week, and it was simple. Best idea wins. Wherever it comes from, the most junior, the newest, the most diverse voice. And I think people really, they embrace that, don't they? Best idea wins. Not the most senior, not the most extrovert, not the most shouty, whatever it might be. Best idea wins.
Yeah, humility, intellectual humility, right? And
exactly that.
And it moves us all forward, absolutely.
So take me on to, obviously, your focus and well-being, because I know that is something that you've really zoned in on. And you mentioned something that actually people are working hard. And in many ways, I suppose technology is allowing us to almost never not be at work. The pandemic was a deeply personal experience for everyone. You would have had a personal experience. I had a personal experience. Anyone listening or watching will have had a personal experience of it. How comes that became your focus, the health and well-being element? Because we've chatted to a few people over the last couple of years on it, and I know it's important, but tell me what you were seeing which drove you towards your work.
I mean, it was very much before the pandemic, and a lot of the kind of motivation for me was, armored by that understanding of design thinking, was looking at how can we work better and still improve health. And I zoned in initially in the business case. I was inspired by different things that were out there in terms of corporate athlete methodology, very classic kind of work. by Jim Lohr and Tony Schwartz.
Yep.
And I felt, what is that business case so that we can go forward? And it's the whole peak performance industry, which sometimes goes a little bit far, but that was the initial kind of context for me. And that was very useful and very, it allowed me to answer a lot of questions. And I still have many questions. From peak performance, it moved on to well-being, and then my second book in the space, my first being Sustaining Executive Performance,
right.
How you can keep that going in the long term and not just burn out. Then it was looking at well-being, but making that a little bit more strategic within an enterprise. So this was just before the pandemic. That came out 2018.
It's rather timely.
Yeah. And so still very niche. And even with the performance focus, I felt that I couldn't use the word well-being.
Right.
Even with some clients now, you still talk about the same content. Some of these things that we were talking about, humility, psychological safety, brave leadership, all these different things. I mean, you can label that in different ways. And so with some clients, I talk about well-being, but some clients still don't want to go there.
Is it a little woo-woo for some or nebulous? They're not quite sure what you mean?
Well, I mean, it is hard to measure, absolutely, right? But there's still certain other things that are very much accepted and very strategic. Innovation, still difficult to measure. How do you really think about that ROI and some of these things, right? But certainly well-being, there is a belief, misconception, whatever you want to call it, that it's about doing less work, that you're compromising performance.
There's nothing to do with that, is it?
Right? And this is why I took that peak performance kind of angle in the first place, right? That you actually have a business case for well-being. So getting back to that strategic kind of leveling up of well-being, then that book was called, in the platform, was Chief Wellbeing Officer, which is just a kind of polemic to say, okay, we'll take this very soft word, but we'll put these two very serious business terms on either end, right? But still very niche. I think what the pandemic did, and coming more directly to your question, was that it made us all question what we're doing every day.
It did indeed.
So we were on that hamster wheel before the pandemic, and we may be going 100 miles an hour, and we're very proud of ourselves with the speed that we're moving at.
Yes.
But are we doing the right things? Are we doing the things that are in our own best interests? If we look back on our lives 20 years from now, are we going to be proud of what we were doing on that hamster wheel? So it forced us all off, and it made us question things. And part of that questioning related to how do we spend our time was about experience of life, well-being, health, YOLO, all these different things, right? And so it has been very marked, the change in the attitude towards well-being since the pandemic. And so I've just tried to kind of ride that wave, recognizing that everyone is still waiting and seeing, still on Zoom. A lot of this talk from me is behind the camera, thankfully now becoming more face-to-face again, and just giving people permission, and I think this is the key, Adam, to find their own patterns, and recognizing that hamster wheel before was a pattern, but it was very homogeneous. We were all on that kind of same treadmill, let's say. But now it's about, okay, what's unique to you? What are your own needs? Design thinking again, your own specific needs, what are your own specific pain points? How do you fulfill those in your daily life? And it's the day-to-day.
In many ways, I suppose, over the years, over the decades, we may have sleptwalked into certain ways of working. I'm intrigued to know the difference in you. So you've obviously been on a journey because of the research and the books that you've written. You've obviously been on a journey because you had to deal with the pandemic like the rest of us. What changes do you think have happened in you over the last few years, taking into account the work you've done and the experiences that you've had?
First of all, I say to people, I am not the kind of well-being police. So this is my career, and I talk about things like sleep and mindfulness and positive habits, and but I am not kind of this peak performance, get that extra 0.5% out every day. I enjoy my life, Adam, right? And I have a million bad habits, but the key for me is awareness, and so that I'm always aware, and I maybe, don't live the optimal life from day to day, but I know, or if work needs to be done, then you grind through. But as long as that isn't the norm, so I'm very aware when am I doing kind of what could be conceived as more kind of bad habits.
Yes.
But I'm not just going to be that kind of well-being police every single day of my life, because I want to enjoy my life as well. So I have a really acute awareness, and I have a very strong bias towards experimentation. So I'm always trying new things, and I have the excuse within my work, but I'm trying and failing, and I'm not afraid of failure.
Help me understand awareness. What do you do that allows you to be more deliberate as regards to awareness of self? Because, this comes up a lot about leaders needing to be much more aware of themselves before we start to think about how they lead others and on and on. So tell me how you've increased that sense of awareness for you.
It's a great question. I think there's 2 or 3 elements, and I may employ some of these at different times.
Right.
First of all, there's the power of writing and journaling especially.
Okay.
Right? That you actually have some sort of connection with all of the thoughts that are going on in your head and getting that down in paper, right? And it's not just, and I always encourage people to write with a pen,
or
rather
an electronic
than just
one.
Exactly, right, on a tablet or whatever. But you're actually using, the kind of, you're interpreting the thoughts in your head by the shape, and again, being a designer, by the shapes and the forms that you put, and it could be doodles or whatever it is. It's not just on a keyboard. It's very kind of, it's too clean, and you're into that whole virtual world. So I just think writing is very powerful, and it could be sketching or whatever it is, right? And you have that kind of self-dialogue, right?
How often do you journal or write?
I try and do it on a daily basis,
right?
In the evening.
Well, you're the author of the Daily Reset, so
yeah, exactly. So I use a lot of these things myself, right? And I think, oh my God, I never did that, or that's a great reminder.
That's called the
I wrote that myself 6 months ago.
Isn't it?
Exactly.
We're all the cobbler's children.
Exactly. You've got a Spanish term as well. It's like kind of the cuchillo, the wooden knife. Anyway. So yes, I have that bias, and I try and have that communication.
Yep.
But sometimes I don't do it, right? And if I'm busy or whatever, but I think the next element, and that sometimes comes from the journaling, is mindfulness, right? Okay. And I think there's a lot of belief that mindfulness is meditation.
Yep.
But it isn't. It's not the same. Mindfulness is a state that can be achieved through different things, and meditation is one of those tools that you can use to achieve mindfulness, right? So I just think that if we broaden our concept or understanding of what is mindfulness in your day-to-day. And so I've been able to cultivate what I hope and think, and I'm still improving. And sometimes I'm on autopilot, which is the opposite, right?
Well, you are human as well.
Exactly, which is this hamster wheel and being on autopilot and just executing off the cuff, and you need that.
But you catch yourself.
You need to build with competence, but then you catch yourself. You're right? You could be catching yourself in the mirror, kind of metaphorical mirror, and you think, okay, what's going on there? You could be triggered, for example, right? You're triggered by another person. You're triggered by an email. You're triggered by a phone call or a red bubble notification. So I'd like to think that I have more power in terms of less triggering, less autopilot, and I'm more mindful in my day-to-day. And that could be in a conversation, being present, or it could be just being with myself. And I use different things for that. And it could be going for a run or whatever, and exercise is important for me. And so the third element, and these are all very much linked, is just have space, right? So I think when you are on autopilot, when you are not mindful, when you're not aware or intentional about your behavior, it's just because you're so busy, man. And we're all stuck in this world of being
almost
so busy.
Submerged in stuff.
Absolutely. There's no way that you're getting out. You just feel that kind of overwhelm. And so I really do try and cultivate space. And look, the work that I do, I have space built in. I don't have a full-time employer that I'm expected to be present for a long working day and a long working week. I have a portfolio life, and space is naturally built in there.
Master of your own destiny.
And that's good and bad, absolutely.
Of course. I agree.
But I always talk about a quote from Claude Debussy, and he said, music is the space between the notes. And in business, we kill that space. We don't make that music. And so what I think we can take from that quote as well is that if we want to be creative, if we want to do work that has, that is special, then we need that space also. We need that creativity. And if not, we're just executing, and it's just copy and paste, and it's the same way it's always been done.
It reminds me almost as it, apparently Bill Gates said that busy is the new stupid. And sometimes we're all very good at being very, very busy.
Yeah, because we think it's an ego thing again. Coming back to
Well, in some ways, it's a slightly archaic approach. I've been working now for decades, and I think of some industries. You had to be busy in some way, shape, or form, but busy doing what? So this ability to stop, to pause, to think, to reflect, to be self-aware. In some ways, it feels the pandemic magnified the importance of that. And there's a wonderful phrase which I've used before on episodes, and I think this is really relevant to what you're saying. And forgive me, I don't remember who said it, but I do love it. Is that when you press the pause button on a computer, it stops. When you press the pause button on a human, that's when we start to think. And actually, the pandemic pressed the big red almighty pause button on everybody. Yeah. And maybe we all thought, why are we on this hamster wheel? So tell me a little bit about the daily reset. What's that all about?
Yeah. Couple elements in there. I wanted to really, all the things that I had learned in health, wellbeing, performance, design, thinking as a context, I wanted to put that in a format that was very easy to absorb. And I wanted to, my first book in the space, Sustaining Executive Performance, was a bit dense and a bit academic, so I am still on that recovery from being an academic.
That's why you're a recovering academic,
exactly.
Stephen.
And I'm thinking, how can we communicate some of these very important messages in an easy to absorb fashion, right? And I was inspired by a couple of things, and one of those being the Daily Stoic from Ryan Holiday, and I felt that was a good way of absorbing some kind of meaty, important messages without dumbing it down, but it's still very accessible. And so I thought, and I'd had a kind of idea in that space for a while, but I thought I could do that for wellbeing, and I didn't think it existed. And so I wanted to write a book that was also a journal that people could engage with. Okay. So the book, Adam, or journal, or whatever you want to call it, is a series of nudges for every day of the year. And every month of the year has a theme. Okay. So January being movement, February habits, March sleep, and we have other things including purpose, community, and leadership, which is the month of November.
Which is my birthday month. I have no idea how that's relevant, but there we go. I'm looking for a link.
What? The funny thing is, and I put this on socials a few weeks ago, when people get the book for the first time, they always go
to the birthday month.
To their birthday. But they go to their birthday, and what are they doing? It's as if they're looking for a message for them, right? Yeah. As if there's a meaning there. And you know what? Whatever happens, they often find it, because people say, I went to my birthday and you wouldn't believe that, because that speaks to me because of. Right. And I don't know, it happens for many people.
I'm going to have a look and see exactly what is. But it's funny, I had leadership in November. So it was meant to be. Yes. It's a serendipity in some ways. Yeah. Tell me what's behind, in partly you have, but tell me what's behind this nudging aspect in relation to changing behaviour, because we've probably all been there where it's a new year and we've got some New Year's resolutions, and by, who knows, the middle of January, we're kind of, what were those resolutions? Exactly. So, and forgive me, there are some people who are very, very good at this. I'm not. What's behind the nudging?
So it's understanding that we are often too ambitious, right? And we approach behaviour change in the wrong way, and we often, and not just in behaviour change, but anything in our lives, we go for the big challenge, right? We're all competent, skilled people, and we want to do well, and so we give a big effort to something, a big heavy rock, and we push hard on that for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and then we leave it there because we're distracted by something else, and we move on to another big heavy rock over here.
All shiny.
Give that,
all shiny.
Exactly. we love starting new things. Yeah. There's another thing in Agile that I love. It's stop starting and start finishing, because we always have balls in the air, and we get excited by starting a new thing, but then when we are halfway through, that shiny new object becomes less shiny, and then we see something else that is shiny, and we start something else. So then that leads to overwhelm. So often what I say to people is, just stop starting new things for a bit and get finishing. There's a real pleasure to finishing as well, right?
Or have some of those people on your team, which is what I always need. Those finisher completers, probably not best describes me. But again, it's having that complementary skill set and that diversity of skill set, which makes, I assume, a high-performing team, because not everyone can do everything. Absolutely. So that kind of resonates.
So the better way, rather than that big push, is just these little tiny efforts, but you build it in every day, and you get that cumulative impact.
So it's habit.
So it's the habit, right? And habits exist for two main reasons: to save us time,
Right.
and to save us energy. You know, if it wasn't for habits, we wouldn't get very much done in our day. Most of what we do every day is invisible. And sometimes we need to surface that to break it apart. And then sometimes we need the automaticity. So often what I say to people is raise that awareness, build something new, but make it small. A lot of it is the time that it takes a habit to form. And most of the research points to the fact that the smaller and less complex something is,
Yes.
that neural development in your brain takes less time. So you get over the finish line much sooner and you can forget about it, right? And it's not being less ambitious because you build on baby steps. So I often say to people, whatever, you want to start meditating, you want to start exercise, you want to start, being nicer with your team, make it a tiny, what seems ridiculous change or improvement. But once that becomes automatic, then you can build on that step by step. But essentially, it's just believing in the power of daily change. So that if you build something new and positive and tiny, it's not going to take away from the main thrust of your day,
Right.
or your energy. But if you do it every day, my goodness, life goes fast. Before you know it, a month has passed, a business quarter, a year, and you have that significant cumulative impact.
Is there something about the deliberateness, if I made up a word, of this? You know, for instance, I've got lots of habits or routines. I'll brush my teeth and not really remember, tie my shoelaces. You know, sometimes the commute or the drive where, you know, you're away somewhere else, you don't even recall it. But talking about the daily habit, is that something that I just need to be a little bit more deliberate about and thoughtful about so I don't start to fall into the automated?
Yeah, it's a game, right? Because you need that automaticity, as I said, right?
Yeah.
But you surface. So it's like I often talk about invisible and visible habits or behavior changes,
Right.
like the surface of the water, right? Sometimes you're below the water and it's kind of invisible and it's
Yeah.
automatic. Sometimes you need to surface that. You surface it, you be deliberate to evaluate, because in many ways the brain, it doesn't distinguish between good and bad habits, mostly.
Yes.
It just becomes automatic. So you make it deliberate and you ask yourself, is this serving me? Do I want this for the longer term? And what you can often do is place a new thing next to driving, brushing your teeth, all these things that we already do.
Okay.
So you can call this different things. It's been around for a long time. You know, James Clear, who's sold a lot of books in this space, calls that habit stacking. There's other terms for that. But you have that placement or that trigger so that it gives you that reminder. You're brushing your teeth and you think, oh, yeah, I'm going to meditate after this
So
for
you
30
use one
seconds.
almost to be catalyst for the other.
Exactly. It gives you that support, right? So that deliberateness is there. But then eventually, if you're happy with that and you want that for the longer term, let that fade and let that go under the surface of the water. It's all good and it's all part of your new, more positive routine. Think about something else to add on, right?
Okay. Share with me some of your thoughts in relation to leadership. So we're heading to November, because obviously, you know, that's very much the DNA of this show. But what were some of your thoughts or your research about habits around leadership?
We touched on one earlier about empathy, right?
Yep.
So I think that whole importance of bringing your emotional side as a leader and,
Yes.
and not just being that rational kind of taskmaster.
Right.
Because I think, you know, building psychological safety, building loyalty, just having a curiosity in other people as a human being and not just someone to do work. So I think there's that whole motivation,
Okay.
science of human motivation behind there.
We had some young leaders in the studio a few weeks ago, and they talked about their need, and they're in their mid-20s, early 30s, so young in my book. They talked about their need for personalised leadership from their leaders, and I think, you know, that's really what we're talking about here as well.
Yeah,
to
I think
understand them.
leaders as human beings. You know, I interviewed Jose Maria Alvarez Payete a few years ago.
You said that far better than I
Yeah,
could ever
the
say.
CEO of Telefonica, and he said, Stephen, it's not like I just go to work with my head and not my heart,
Right.
or if I'm just at home with only my heart and not my head. I'm the same person, head and heart in both places.
So there's the authenticity piece, right?
And I always remember that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Say his name again.
Jose Maria Alvarez Payete.
That is rather wonderfully. I can only assume you speak Spanish with that excellent pronunciation. But so what are some of the other things that really came up in relation to the leadership space?
Right, what else is in there? I think a lot of that agile leadership piece.
Yep.
You know, stop, starting, start, finishing, and other things about how you get work done.
Right.
And I think another one is about stop telling people what to do. Give them a problem to solve, which is all about that empowerment piece, giving them the trust and the flexibility to solve that problem
Yes.
in the way that they best see fit.
Well, they're probably closer to the problem than the leader is anyway.
Exactly. It comes back to that intellectual humility piece that we talked about earlier, right? Yeah. I think the ego of the leader is to say, well, I have an understanding of this subject, and I think what I believe is the way forward should be the way forward, but often it's not, right? As you say, they're closer to the problem. So I think that's an important piece. And also humility in leadership in general, recognizing that leaders are not just the extroverts, but they can be the introverts also. Yeah. Some of the research points to that fact that introverted leaders are more self-aware, back to this awareness piece, and they drive higher performance and more safety. And as a leader, you're not the expert necessarily anymore. You are an orchestrator, you're a facilitator. So I think a lot of, in general, my work in well-being, as I come back to what I mentioned earlier about finding our own pattern of navigating the workspace, I think a lot of leadership is, as a leader, as a facilitator and orchestrator, how do you help surface or enrich that pattern in the people that you lead, right? And that can be very powerful.
And I can't decouple leadership and culture. I very much of the view that they go hand in glove. So what were some of your thoughts as well in relation to, supportive cultures or the cultures that people really want going forward? I think, we're moving into an era now where there are going to be 5 demographics working in a single organization for the first time ever. Yeah. So that's an incredible spread of ages. And what are your thoughts on that aspect of culture?
I quite agree with you in terms of how I conceive leadership and culture. And for me, and coming back to a previous point that many clients often don't want to talk about well-being, what I then say to them is like, how do we achieve positive culture? And how do we develop positive leadership, right? That whole science on positive organizations. And so for me, that positive culture is built step by step on discrete individual behaviors. And so the aggregate of those behaviors give us that culture. And I often say to people, forget about the organization for now. Just think about your team, however many people are in that team. How do they behave? How do they talk to each other? Right? Even coming back to an old Peter Drucker quote that I love, good manners are the lubricating oil of an organization. And I think that's so important. Even in today's world when we're so busy, do we still have that basic civility with the people that we're spending a lot of time with each day? So I think those aggregate behaviors give us that culture, and leaders are probably the most important element in promoting those positive behaviors.
Role modeling
that on one hand, because I think these young leaders or the younger demographics, it doesn't really matter what the policy says; they just copy other people. I think, and I never quite found the citation, but when I was with a client a few years ago, the general manager, he said a really cool quote, and I hope it is backed up by science. He said, "If you're the most senior person in the room, people look at you 6 times more." And I think leaders, they probably know that they're always being observed and watched, but maybe not to that extent, right? So I think the younger demographics, they're always looking at this most senior person.
You're always being watched.
They're always being watched. They want the validation maybe from the more senior person, but they're always watching what they're doing, what are they saying, and then they copy them, right?
Limbic synchrony, I think they call it, don't they? Right? That mirroring aspect.
Yeah. So, that's that social nature of who we are as human beings, and I think so because of that, how leaders behave, the behaviours that they reward in their teams, what they do to try and, because toxic behaviour is going to come up, obviously, how do they deal with that? So I think that whole piece on positive leadership, positive culture, and the role of behaviour within that, that's how I like to think about it.
How does, people who are listening or watching this in a variety of leadership roles, how do they know that they've got a positive culture? What will be some of the consequences or what evidence will they hear or see where they know at least they're on the right track?
Yeah. I think people want to go to work on a Monday morning.
So it's basic as that, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And we think about KPIs and what can you measure? I mean, can you measure people's positive emotions? Do you see people smiling, right? In spite of being busy, in spite of being challenged, and even flow theory, right, from Csikszentmihalyi is like we need to be stretched. Yeah. We need to sweat in order to feel that kind of optimum human experience and to grow, right? So it's not as if you're just having a jolly every day at work. We need to stretch to feel best.
Yes.
but you can still enjoy that stretch. So I think, look around. And I think you feel energy as well. I was in this room yesterday with 150 doing this keynote, as I said, and you feel the energy, and you don't get that online.
You thrive off the energy, don't you?
You feed off it, right? Energy is contagious. And this is one of the nudges in the book, and it's a story that I have with my dog when I first became a dog owner. And a friend of mine...
Called Teddy.
Yes. Old English sheepdog, Dulux dog, called Teddy.
Is that showing our age if we say Dulux? Are they still using...
I think so. I think you still get those adverts. Yeah. You get them in the UK and you also get them in Australia.
Right, okay.
So Australians know the Dulux dog thing as well.
We talk about loads of things on this show.
Everyone
I
else,
think I've just dated myself again by...
Yeah.
There you go. Look, James has just pulled up on the screen the Dulux dog.
Yeah.
And it's iconic, actually, isn't it?
Yeah,
that dog is iconic with Dulux. So anyway, there you go. Well done to them for that marketing.
So my friend would come up and he would start jumping up and down in this really frenzied state. And because he did that, my dog would do the same. Because dogs copy the energy. Energy is contagious.
Yeah.
And then what he would say is, he'd say, "Wow, Stephen, your dog is crazy." I thought, well, yeah, you're causing that craziness. And then after that, I became much more aware. It was the first time I became a dog owner. And I realised that I was only aware, again, coming back to this awareness, that I was anxious because she was reflecting that. And she picked up on that. And I think there's some fascinating research on even dogs being able to smell chronic disease and cancer and all these things. So they're so perceptive. And I think that whole aspect of energy being contagious. And I say to people, when was the last time you had good news to share with someone?
Yes.
When you tell them, how do they react? Are they happy for you? Are they enthused also? So if you go into the workplace and you're apathetic and you're miserable and you're tired, that's going to have an effect on other people. So I think picking up on culture, it often is, do you feel that energy? Do you see signals of it? Are people happy to go to work?
Now, I say to everybody, whether they're listening, watching, or whoever I meet, wherever I meet them, we're all work in progress. Whether we've got the most experienced CEO in the room or the most amazing world number one of whatever discipline, all work in progress. All these people have got coaches and mentors, or one hopes. So how can people get hold of the book?
Amazon.
It's always going to be that. I almost don't know why I asked the question.
I'd love to say kind of independent bookstores and whatever, Barnes and Noble.
Those days are gone, aren't they?
I'm sorry. But, it's on some of these things like Apple Books and Google Books and other, but mostly Amazon.
Have you seen a hard copy on a shelf?
Have I? No, I haven't. No.
It just doesn't really happen, does it?
Yeah.
I remember when we wrote our book in 2020, it was on Amazon and, and it's lovely reviews and things like that. I've never seen it. I might have to just take a book one day and stuff it on a shelf somewhere to placate me. How do people also get in touch with you if they want to know more, carry on the conversation, or get you involved in their conversations? How do they do that?
I'm pretty active on social media, Adam. So all the usual platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, mostly LinkedIn, but also Twitter, a bit of Instagram here and there, and things like that.
Under your name?
Under my name. So, and sometimes if not just my name, then Dr. Steven MacGregor, and they'll find me. So I think if anyone wants to find me, I'm sure they can. Okay.
So my final question to you is, with all of the research as a recovering academic that you've done and the conversation we've just had, what's the best piece of leadership advice that comes to mind for you that you've ever given or received?
I mean, that head and heart quote is really powerful from me, from Jose Maria.
Yeah. You're toying with me now because you just simply know I can't say it as wonderfully as that.
I think, I don't know if it was a formal piece of advice I received or even given, but I just think that bias towards experimentation and not being afraid of failure, because I think if we're always, and it comes to so many things, it comes to ego, it comes to being brave and the importance of humility.
Yeah.
But if we're always just doing the same things because we're afraid of failure, you don't move forward.
Right.
I used a video that came out of the pandemic. It was from Dr. Michael Ryan, an epidemiologist at World Health Organization. He was talking in the first few weeks of the pandemic. And it was when all of the governments around the world were kind of fudging decisions and they weren't sure what to do. And he made this impassioned plea and he said, look, do not delay.
Yeah.
He said, speed is of the utmost importance. And I'm not saying it's always just about speed in leadership, but what he said is perfection is the enemy of the good. And he said, and it was all about having this bias towards action. And I think for leadership, especially maybe new leaders or recognizing that the context is changing, leaders could overthink things because there's pretty meaty problems out there.
And they're trying to get it right.
Yeah, and they want to the pressure is on.
Yeah.
But I think maybe that 80-20 rule, good engineering rule, should come in, and it's just leaders actually being brave, getting that 80% answer, and navigating on the fly, which again is a very design kind of thinking approach, and just optimizing as they go. So having that bias towards trying new things, towards experimentation, not being afraid of failure, even though the whole failure piece is a little bit cheesy and overdone, perhaps. But I think I would go in that area, Adam, to finish.
It's almost akin to the agile, isn't it? Of having sprints.
Yeah.
Where you do something for 4 to 6 weeks and just see how you go. And it might be you really haven't done very well.
Yeah.
Or it might be that actually that is the direction of travel.
Well,
and you pivot and away you go again.
Totally. Yeah.
But it's always easier said than done. Listen, Steven, thanks so much for taking the time. I know you're in London doing lots of weird and wonderful things, which is great. This is the weird one.
Yeah.
But no, I really, really appreciate it. It's good to see you, good to meet you, good to chat to you. Thanks so much.
Likewise, loved it. Thank you, Adam.
Join us again next week for more curiosity and insight with the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with me on LinkedIn or visit us at www.leadersenigma.com. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms and on our dedicated YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining the community.